Okay, so we're talking Russia, Ukraine again today, but we're not going to get bogged down in the, daily headlines and all that. Instead, we're going to look at something that's honestly pretty terrifying. And it's this weapon called Oreshnik.
Hmm.
Yeah, so just picture this for a sec.
Yeah.
A missile going 10 times the speed of sound. That's Mach 10.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 kilometers per second.
That's incredible.
I know. We're not talking like Star Wars here. This is a real weapon that Russia has already used against Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And this analysis that we're going through today, it's arguing that this is a total game changer.
Yeah, I can see why.
That's crazy. This piece actually compares it to something you might remember from high school history class, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And back then, the whole world was freaking out because the U.S. and the Soviet Union were facing off over these nuclear weapons in Cuba.
Right.
And there are some pretty scary parallels here.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about how this could escalate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing both sides basically responding to what they see as threats with just these increasingly powerful weapons.
Right.
And, in this case, Russia used this Oreshnik right after Ukraine attacked Russian territory with those long-range missiles that they got from the West.
Yeah.
And so Moscow saw that as crossing a red line, like a direct attack on their country.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, what they consider acceptable and not at this point.
Exactly.
Well, and okay, so back to the Oreshnik itself.
Okay.
I mean, the speed of this thing is just mind-blowing.
It is, yeah.
The source is saying that the current missile defense systems just can't keep up with something moving that fast.
Yeah, they weren't designed for that.
It's like trying to, hit a fly with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
You just can't react fast enough.
That's a great analogy.
And that's exactly why this weapon is so scary.
It is.
It's not just how powerful it is, but it's the mental impact.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine being a NATO country and knowing that there's this thing out there that can hit your capital in minutes and you can't do a single thing to stop it.
Right.
That's a pretty scary thought.
Yeah, it is.
And that feeling that no one is safe. That's a key part of what makes the Oreshnik such a strong, deterrent, as our source says. It's Russia's basically saying, look, we've got this crazy weapon and we will use it.
Right.
So you better think twice before you mess with us.
Exactly. That's the message they're sending. But, here's where it gets really interesting. Deterrence only works if the other side actually thinks you'll use the weapon.
Right.
And in this case, Russia has already shown they're not afraid to use it.
They have.
And so that brings up some serious questions about how this whole conflict could get even worse.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you consider the whole bigger picture of what the source calls a proxy war.
Right.
It's not just Russia and Ukraine fighting anymore.
Yeah.
It's Russia against the West.
Exactly.
With countries like the U.S. and the U.K. giving Ukraine weapons and intelligence and all that.
Right. And every time a new weapon gets thrown into the mix, the stakes go up.
They do.
So the West is walking on eggshells right now, trying to support Ukraine without making Russia mad enough to start a bigger war.
Right.
But this Oreshnik, it throws a huge wrench in that whole plan.
For sure.
Yeah, and that's what makes this analysis so interesting. It really shows just how complicated war is these days.
It is.
Where you can't really tell the difference between a regular war and a proxy war anymore.
Right.
It's all mixed up.
Yeah. The source even says that hypersonic weapons like this Oreshnik have fundamentally changed how fast this conflict is moving.
Yeah.
It's hitting fast forward on the whole crisis.
I see what you mean. It's because these weapons are so fast and unpredictable,
Right.
it makes everyone feel like things could get out of control really quickly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't leave much time for diplomacy and negotiations and all that.
Not at all. It's almost like everyone's playing this high-stakes game of chess, but the pieces are moving faster and faster.
Right.
And if you make the wrong move, the consequences are way worse.
Exactly. And the source doesn't hold back on what those consequences could be.
No, it doesn't.
We're not just talking about a war in one region.
Right.
This could be a world war.
It could.
Something that pulls in all the major powers, and it would be devastating for everyone.
Absolutely devastating. It really makes you wonder if this whole Oreshnik thing could be a wake-up call.
Maybe.
Maybe it could make world leaders finally step back and say, okay, wait, we need to find a better way to deal with this.
Yeah, it would be great if it did.
It would.
The source seems to think there's still time to de-escalate things.
Okay.
But they say that window is closing fast.
Yeah.
And they're really pushing for leaders to focus on diplomacy and, helping people instead of just their own political goals.
Right. But finding common ground is going to be so hard.
It is.
Especially with all the bad blood between everyone involved.
Yeah, you've got that right. It takes, a willingness to see things from the other side's point of view, to understand, like, why they're scared and what they want, even if you don't agree with them.
Yeah.
And it takes, being committed to talking things out and finding solutions that actually solve the problems that started this whole mess in the first place.
For sure. It's complicated.
Oh, it is. And the source brings up another interesting point.
Okay, what's that?
You know how the current administration is almost over?
Yeah.
Well, the new administration has totally different ideas about this war.
They do. That's true. And the source actually says that this new administration wants to end the war.
Yeah.
But because of how the current administration has handled things, especially giving Ukraine those long-range missiles,
right,
it's put them in a tough spot. Like, if they try to find a peaceful solution now, it might make them look weak.
Exactly.
It's like we're stuck in this dangerous standoff where both sides are waiting for the other to back down first.
Yeah.
And the longer that goes on, the more likely it is that something small could blow up into a huge disaster.
That's the scary part. And that's where the Oreshnik comes back in.
Right.
It's like this reminder of how quickly things can go wrong.
Yeah.
And how just one new weapon can totally change the whole war.
And it makes it really clear that everyone needs to be talking.
Absolutely.
And we need to focus on diplomacy way more.
Yes.
And realize that if this all goes south, the consequences are going to be way too terrible to even think about.
I agree.
I mean, it really feels like we're at this turning point right now. Like, the source lays out all these different scenarios, but it doesn't really tell us what's going to happen.
Right.
And I think that's the whole point.
Yeah, I think so too.
Like, it's not about knowing the future or anything.
Right.
It's about realizing just how serious things are.
It is.
And knowing that the decisions we make now are really important.
Yeah, they'll have a big impact.
They really will. And it's a call to action, I think.
It is.
For all of us.
Yeah, not just like presidents and prime ministers.
Right.
It's for everyone.
Yeah. We all got to stay informed and, actually talk about this stuff and make sure our leaders are putting peace first.
Absolutely. Because, we've seen with this Oreshnik.
Yeah.
Like, the technology is getting scarier and scarier.
It is.
But are we actually any better at preventing war?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, are we still using the same old strategies from, like, the Cold War?
Yeah.
Or are we willing to change with the times?
And the source is saying that we need a whole new way of thinking about this.
We do.
Like, we got to understand that global security is all connected.
Yeah, it's not just about being the strongest anymore.
Right.
We have to put more effort into diplomacy and solving conflicts peacefully and building trust between countries.
It's about realizing that, one country doesn't have to lose for another country to win.
Exactly.
We can find solutions that are good for everyone.
We can.
But everyone has to be willing to change how they think about power and all that.
And, maybe the biggest lesson here is that war is just too awful.
It is.
Like, we've talked about the politics and the strategies, but in the end, it's real people who are hurting.
Yeah.
Families are being ripped apart.
Right.
People are dying. And this war is going to leave scars for a really long time.
So what happens now?
Oh, that's a good question.
The source leaves us with a question.
Okay.
And it's one I want to ask you too.
Okay.
Do you think there's any way to calm things down? Let me know what you think in the comments.